Susana Bastos Mateos here from University of Lisbon, who holds the chair, the Albert Benveniste Chair in Sephardic Studies. It's not only a chair; they publish an excellent journal, one of the really great journals in Jewish history, and do much more. I was lucky enough to be hosted by them in that was January, right?
January.
A wonderful day of intellectual exploration. And Susana is going to be our first speaker. Then we go on to Ignacio Chueca Saldias, someone who's become a dear friend of mine, someone I've learned just so much on so many levels, particularly things close to my heart, like the Carvajal case, but many others. And after years, I finally got a chance to meet him this January, so in person. So it's really great, and great to have both of you here. It's a great opportunity. Again, like I said, Ignacio comes all the way from Chile, at the end of the earth. So it's good to have him here in the center of the world for some people. But it's just one point in an orb that keeps on spinning, right? And tonight we'll have two talks. We'll have plenty of time to talk. There's food. It's all vegetarian, so there's Kemach and there's Torah. So we got both. I'm really happy to see who came tonight. Each and every one of you, really special to make time to come, not only to study and think new thoughts, but to be in honor of Herman Solomon, Adam Gadol, truly a great man who left his imprint here at YU and in the wider world of scholarship, and in a very personal way. The people who got to know Herman knew him well, knew him deeply, and tonight our first speaker is going to share some personal reflections, which means a lot to us, to everyone who's here, about your connection to Herman and his legacy. And it's a living legacy. I think anyone who works in this material knows the important gifts that he's left us to go deeper into. So without any further ado, thank you, Susana.
Thank you so
really.
much. Thank you. Well, good evening. I will sit with your permission and just start.
Wires.
Trying not to disconnect anything. So first of all, I would like to thank Ronnie Perellis for his invitation to participate in this seminar. Thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you all of you for being here this evening. Take your time to be with us. And I would like to say, as Ronnie mentioned, that it makes me particularly happy that this event is in honor and memory of Herman Prince Solomon. A professor who, in addition to being fundamental to the study of the Portuguese Inquisition, Portuguese New Christians, and so many other thematics that Herman was very knowledgeable about, to me, it was also fundamental to my own academic journey, because I remember meeting Herman I shouldn't say this, but more than 20 years ago. Because he was searching for some help with some documents preserved at the Portuguese National Archive at Torre do Tombo in Lisbon, and I provided him with some assistance. And then we start working together, and we exchanged many emails and letters also. You remember the old time letters, and also many visits in Lisbon, because Herman was was also Portuguese in a certain way. He knew a lot of Portuguese life and Portuguese towns and way of living. And from that point, I think the relationship of both work as friendship also, a sort of friendship flourish also. I remember with great fondness his humor and the critical spirit he applied to his work and the work of others. So when I wrote my first article on the role of New Christian women in a small community in northern Portugal, just after the the establishment of the Inquisition. Herman wrote me a long email about it, praising in a certain way, but also with a lot of critiques that when I revise it right now, I think those critiques were very important to my work and the continuation of my work. In a certain way, it was also with deep emotion that we managed to publish, to edit, two of his posthumous books at Alberto Benveniste Share in Lisbon. One of which, and I have it here, it was published in December. The most recent one was unfortunately unfinished and lacked his profound critical apparatus. We decided in his honor also to leave it like this, so with the few notes he managed to fulfill and to finish, but we decided not to create any introduction or not create any annotation that wasn't his own, because we thought that his style and his convictions, his ideas were very strong, and so. But it's in Portuguese, but if you want to, you can take a look at it. What I have retained from our experience together is precisely that deeply critical gaze towards sources and the sharp way of framing questions. It is with great pleasure then that I bring this research here. Is my work in progress right now. Though with sadness because of not being able to count on his critical opinions that for sure will be very important to my work. But it's with our conversations and also with the reading of his works on my mind that I will present then this. So, yes. A book of one's own, New Christians Women's Readings Across the Early Modern Global Atlantic. So as you can imagine by the title, as you may gather, I have drawn upon Virginia Woolf's title to conceptualize this presentation. The English writer spoke of the importance of a woman having a space of her own, or minimum of material conditions so that she could maintain herself and dedicate her life, in the case she referred to writing. My argument here today is that due to the specific conditions of Iberian migrations to colonial territories, women were subjected to certain social conditions, and that in some cases, the possession of books, reading and writing, and even the performance surrounding reading and translation, granted them two things: agency and coercion within their own groups. On the other hand, this creation of a feminine sphere more closed off from the outside world can also be understood as a mechanism that enhances resistance against the repressive apparatus of the Iberian Inquisitions. I am thinking of and appropriating the concept of textual agencies. I will talk a little bit more in a few moments, to approach this group of women. I will seek to bring forward two examples, one from Mexico and another from Brazil, to bring forward to show how these women appropriated the words written, read, spoken, and performed to find their space in colonial societies, so to find a room of one's own. I will start talking a little bit about the structural reality of Iberian migrations into the colonial worlds. So in this case, I'm thinking about the Portuguese experience. And allow me to start with two references that can frame the Portuguese reality. Migration, so as a general context of my talk. migration is a structural constant of the Portuguese reality. This was an assertion made by the Portuguese historian, a very important one, Vitorino Magalhães Godinho, in a seminal article analyzing Portuguese immigration from a longue durée perspective, from the 15th century to the 1960s. On the other hand, I'm also thinking on the book from 1994, if I'm not mistaken, of Russell Woods, called A World on the Move, to reflect on the early modern period, not only the Iberian world, of course, but with a major focus on the Iberian world and its colonial empires. In other words, the modern era, the early modern era, must be seen as a moment of great mobility and migratory flows. Furthermore, to move closer to the case studies, there is a temporal coincidence between the Iberian territorial expansion and the movement of religious closure, marked by the expulsions of religious minorities and the establishment of the Inquisitions, all of which were catalysts for migration, in this case with religious overtones. The more or less coercive and even forced nature of these migrations cannot be overlooked, especially when considering the female sector part of this population movement. Elements such as violence and racialization must be taken into account, of course, when analyzing groups of orphans, enslaved women, and indigenous women. Generally, in many locations of the Portuguese Empire, complaints were made regarding the lack of women, and there were severe regulations prohibiting there were severe regulations prohibiting the presence of women on the ships of the Armadas, both to Brazil and India. The lack of population in the Portuguese colonial world was, in itself, a structural constant, which led to various demographic policies and experiments involving the relocation of populations, at times violently. The Portuguese historian Jorge Flores coined the term human engineering to describe this forced relocation of populations to fulfill the demographic needs of the Portuguese crown. New Christians were undoubtedly a group that played an expressive role in this migratory phenomenon. I believe their motivation must be placed within a binomial that combines the impact of religious persecution, of course, but also with imperial dynamics themselves. In the case of American territories, both Portuguese and Spanish, these areas were an enticing element for Portuguese New Christians, as many authors have already mentioned. Some scholars have highlighted the problems faced by this migration. From the beginning of the 16th century, there were various restrictive trends regarding the migration of New Christians into imperial spaces, with laws of opening and prohibition being constantly renewed. The administrative structures and their officials themselves complained about the presence of New Christians in the empire, considering them harmful and potentially disruptive elements. However, particularly in the colonial world, the presence of New Christians as agents of intermediation between different spaces, empires, and non-European political realities was often unavoidable. In critical political junctures such as the year 1640 and the years after, the presence of Portuguese individuals in Spanish America was considered problematic. Authors such as Pedro Cardinho and Brian Ham have worked on this image of the Portuguese seen as foreigners, traitors, and apostates, creating a highly politicized narrative that directly equated Portuguese, equivalent as New Christians, equivalent as apostates, so Judaizers, other term, other significant. Therefore, with these various elements, we should consider this migratory constant, so is this the framework of it all, as quite complex, in which New Christians, men and women, must be seen not merely as victims of religious persecution, but in a movement produced by a constant flight from that persecution, but also as integrants and participants in imperial dynamics. So, in this polyhedral mobility, it is interesting to understand the role of women, to my understanding. and in this specific case, New Christian women. I believe that here, as I have mentioned, despite the importance of the religious or ethno-religious factor and religious persecution, we cannot consider it the only explanatory and defining element of this mobility. From what I have gathered through the analysis of different migratory profiles of New Christian women to America and also Asia, but today I'm centering on the Atlantic, the majority of migrant women traveled within a family context, with migration being driven by a male choice. Sometimes the migration was carried out simultaneously by a family group. Other times men migrated first and women followed shortly after, often already with children. So like a kind of a relocation and regroupment, or familiar regroupment. In this panorama, it seems we can say that these New Christian women do not generally present a great capacity for agency in choosing the destination or the moment of migration. However, in my view, and with the two examples I bring here, the typologies inherent to the social reality of the chosen migration destinations, as well as the religiosities typical of a New Christian context, of clandestinity and heterodoxy, allowed many of them to achieve a capacity for agents that cannot be ignored. This was achieved especially through the creation of their small universes of sociability, as well as the appropriation of the words and the male roles they performed in their meetings. It will be precisely the creation of these specific universes of heterodoxy that will bring them significant trouble with the Inquisition. So the first case I want to talk briefly is about is that of Justa Mendes, that Ronnie knows very, very well. A Portuguese New Christian born in Seville, within a context of New Christian groups dedicated to trade, who migrated sometime in the 16th century from the interior of Portugal to Seville and from there to the American territories. Born around 1575, Justa Mendes was 30 years old at the time of her voyage to New Spain. I think it is important to highlight the moment in life when the journey occurs. In this case, we have a young, single woman, Justa migrated with her mother, already a widow at the time of the voyage, and a brother. When she was detained by the Inquisition of Mexico later on in the 1590s, within the scope of the trials against the Carvajal family, Justa decided to present herself before the inquisitors during the session regarding the discourse of her life, discurso de su vida, as a woman reader. This connection to writing and reading will never leave her. So this case is very impressive in the sense of the relation with reading and writing and possession of books. The case of, and I have here, for those who read Spanish, and if you can read anything at all, the description she presented to the Inquisitors of Mexico. So the case of Justa Mendes involves reading a book during the Atlantic cross, is the way she decided to present herself to the Inquisitors. This choice seems in no way accidental and demonstrates a clear capacity for agency in true texts. And here we are using the concept I was talking before of textual agency, as employed in an article of 1999 by Margarita Zamora, If Cao Naboa Learns to Speak, published in Colonial Latin American Review. And Margarita Zamora said, and I'm quoting, "The agency of a historical subordinated subject can be traced when an individual makes his or her voice heard through a text with intention of provoking a reaction from his or her addressee." So placing herself within this performative action of a woman reader, Justa Mendes, still young, so it's this young girl of 13 years, clearly claims a role before the Mexican inquisitors, the woman reader. In this case, the book in question was the Monarchia Ecclesiastica by Fray Juan Pineda, Franciscan. It was a recent work at the time, published in 1588, but despite being recent, the inquisitors in Mexico were already alert, and the Suprema, so the General Council of the Inquisition in Spain, would also take into account the danger these readings represented. There was a lot of correspondence in the Archivo Histórico Nacional in Madrid regarding the lectures of these books. Oh, okay. Can I sorry. So someone wanted to also enter. Want to listen about the deeds of Justamente. Well, the initiatory journey toward a new stage of life, crossing the Atlantic, is associated with reading and symbolically also with the discovery of Jewish religiosity, let's say it. Because she is telling she was reading in Monarchia Ecclesiastica about the life of the patriarch Abraham. So she was learning about also this, the lives of the old times. Once they arrived in Mexico City, the two women, so mother and daughter, remained alone in a house of women. Casa de Mujeres is what we find in the inquisitorial trial. While the brother left for the mining region, where he would eventually pass away. The women survived through small jobs and joined other Portuguese individuals of New Christian origin. Thus, the connection to Luís de Carvajal occurred, with whom Justa shared a love of reading. So, through him, Justa gained access to Jewish prayer books that circulated in manuscript form throughout New Spain, coming from the Italian Jewish Jewries. Justa became the guardian of the books, so also a women reader, but also a guardian of the books. The one who copied them to distribute manuscript copies to others. Furthermore, and once again motivated by a binomial combining the absence of men from the city and the clandestine nature of the religiosity of these New Christians, Justa assumed a leadership role in the performative rituals conducted within the home. She chose the passages of the Psalms to be read and translate directly from Latin with other women for a group composed entirely of women. They fasted together and sometimes sang and danced. That is, they took upon themselves functions normally destined only for men. Always centered around books, whether scriptures, prayer books, theological literature, or other more mundane texts, like, for instance, a description of the entrance of the Viceroy in Mexico. So there are very different kinds of texts they were reading. The book is the differentiating element of these groups of women, and at the same time an aggregating element. It is no coincidence that in the inventories of assets I studied in the archive in Mexico from these Portuguese New Christian women in Mexico at the end of the 16th century, only Justa Mendes possessed a small library. This the page of a very long legajo of assets. And she possessed a small library. Clearly, this capacity for reading made her more dangerous also in the eyes of the inquisitors. So this will be my first case, and then I would like to, the map I wanted to show you, this Atlantic as imagined by Portuguese cartography. And in the second case, we focus on the family of Branca Dias, and we go to Brazil. We travel to Brazil. Branca Dias, a Portuguese New Christian, born in Viana do Castelo, in a small town in northern Portugal, near the border with Galicia. In the early years of the 16th century, she married Diogo Fernandes around 1520, a cloth merchant with an open shop in that small town. And they had 7 children. Around the 1540s, Diogo migrated to Brazil, receiving a land grant in 1541 for the construction of a sugar mill Engenho near Olinda in the captaincy of Pernambuco. The motives for migration, given the family's complicated history of the Inquisition, because they had some problems there, are usually seen as a preventive flight from potential inquisitorial persecution. However, analyzing the donations and letters from the donatory, it seems that these groups of migrants were indeed seeking to settle and benefit from the sugar economy system that was starting to be constructing into shape in the Brazilian territory. The impact of the August migration was immediately felt in the family. Here I see the logic of growing agency that Branca Dias presents, for it is she who remains in the charge of the cloth shop her husband managed, assisted by her servants. We do not know if the family goal was for Branca Dias and the children to join the husband in Brazil, but we know she was already living in Lisbon when she was arrested by the Inquisition in 1543, and you see the front page of the first of the trial she has in Lisbon. This internal mobility, so before the arrest, she was already living in Lisbon, so she moved south. This internal mobility may indicate a desire to migrate to Brazil. The trial lasts about a year with accusations of Jewish practices. At the end of that year, while fulfilling her spiritual penance, Branca Dias requested to leave the institution where she was confined to care for her children. This permission was granted, but with the express indication that she could not leave the kingdom. Nevertheless, we know that before 1551, the entire family was already reunited in Olinda, in Pernambuco. We either lack the documents providing the license to travel, or, as it seems more likely, the journey was made illicitly. In the captaincy of Brazil, the figure of Branca Dias was transformed once again. The territory where the mill was established was a frontier of conquests, suffering several attacks from surrounding indigenous populations, and even being destroyed at one point. Often women and children remained in the city, in Olinda, and did not venture into the sertão, into the hinterland. Here, in the city, Branca Dias became the protagonist. She had a school for girls and was clearly a tutelary figure for several generations, as she lived a long life, dying only in 1589. When the inquisitorial visitor arrived in Brazil in 1591, the denunciations against the late Branca Dias accumulated. The profile that emerges in the denunciation, so we must bear in mind that we are talking of a very specific typology of documents, is that of a woman with great influence being an educator, first of her children, but also of the other children of the colony. This education was seen as a vehicle for Judaizing. So in the inquisitorial sources, they saw a kind of a connection with the education in the letter, learning to read and write and small things, also as a vehicle for Judaizing. On the other hand, the sugar mill, removed from the urban center, was considered as a secret synagogue, a space where Branca Dias, while Diogo dedicated himself to the arduous work of conquest, so also Diogo was away from the sugar mill, and doing this conquest process and constant conflict with local populations, Branca Dias at the Engenho could perform the role of a fundamental element of new Christian religiosity. This we gather from the sources. In this clandestine Judaism, roles were reserved. In the mill synagogue of Camaragibe, as it was called, to the Branca Dias was seen as a true woman rabbi, is the description that we can see many times in the documents of the visit. It was this role that gave her such prominence also in historiographical and literary narratives as a true Brazilian matriarch. So we have a long genealogy of texts about Branca Dias, until today, nowadays, playwrights, fiction works, historiography that depicted her as a woman rabbi and a Brazilian matriarch. It is no coincidence that despite having already passed away, she would be the person most denounced to the inquisitors during the visit to Bahia and Pernambuco. The case of Branca Dias' textual agency is very interesting because, unlike Justa Mendes, she was not a literate woman. However, likely following an oral family tradition, she managed to pass teachings to her daughters and to the girls who studied with her in the colony. In the inquisitorial trial against her daughter, Andresa Jorge, you can see here, after this visit of the 1590s, we find the narration of an episode that, beyond its anecdotal side, has fascinating implications for the discussion I was trying to bring here today. The setting of this episode is Olinda, at the end of the 16th century. A group of women, daughters, and granddaughters of Branca Dias gather to talk and speak with a man. This man is Bento Teixeira, a learned man and author of the first Brazilian epic called the Prosopopeia. One of the elder women, in the exchange of conversation, asserts herself by saying that he is not before little women, but rather people of stone. So in Portuguese was like mulherinhas, mas sim gente de pedra. So like strong women, not simple women. This statement set the tone for a deeper conversation on matters of faith. The women claimed to have a doubt upon which they had not reached a consensus among them. So this also brings us the idea that they were discussing matters of faith. And the doubt concerned whether the Messiah had already come or not. The man replied that the answer was not simple, but he believed the Messiah had not yet come, though Christians thought he had. This statement resonated with the woman, who reiterated this belief to the others, also saying that, as they had learned, when the true Messiah came, they will receive many goods, whereas with Christ they receive many evils. I'm more or less resuming the document. Bento Teixeira, the man, replied that although it was more complicated than that, understanding that principle was enough for them, since, and I'm quoting, your ladyships are not capable of more because you are women. When Andresa Jorge's husband was at the mill, Bento Teixeira would frequent the house to teach this group of women some Jewish ceremonies and read biblical passages translated into Portuguese, but as he noted, he simplified some of the passages so they could understand better. This is part of his testimony to the inquisitors, which earned him, and this procedure earned him a sharp comment from the lady of the house, the Andresa Jorge, that stated to him, you see, yeah, you have these books and you are reading to us, but you know, my mother had already taught me those things and she didn't even know how to read. In other words, in the backlands of Brazil, women appropriated not only the text, but also the questions relating to their interpretation, showing great disdain for the intermediation of men. And just a few concluding notes, not to conclude if only partially. The structure and typology of migrations and settlement in colonial territories allowed New Christian women within the Atlantic context the possibility of creating their own spaces of agency. While the engine of migration rarely stemmed from a female choice, the absence of men from urban spaces provided women with mechanisms to create their own sociabilities. The universe of books and reading was a mechanism that promoted agency and the occupation of a specific space within the complex religiosity of New Christians. Through books, whether directly or via the oral transmission of knowledge, women managed to directly access knowledge and interpretations of the world that went beyond male intermediation. It is as if they created their own books in a certain way, which granted them a prominent place both in their households and in the confrontation with inquisitorial surveillance and repression later on. So, thank you so much.
Thank you for taking us into those intimate spaces. We're going to hold your questions. Someone wants to get up to get some tea?
I would like to say thanks to Ronnie for the invitation and also to all of you for your patience and interest in these conferences we have with Susanna. And I would like to talk today about this prayer book we have here, which is a very New Yorker, Jewish New Yorker creation from the colonial times, before the War of Independence. This great man, I will try to summarize what we know about him. Isaac Pinto or Yitzhak Pinto, living in the city, he did this translation of the Mahzor and published it in the year 5526, or in the middle of the 18th century. As you see, it's not really a standard Sidur or Mahzor. I'm going to talk about that. It's a collection of prayers for Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah, and Kippur, and also some feasts. And starting with Isaac Pinto, what we do know about the translator is not much. Until now, almost everything we know comes from this book by David de Solapoul. David published, I guess in the 50s, this book about the tombs, the inscription in the tombs, in the oldest cemetery, Jewish cemetery of New York, and there was also the tomb of Isaac Pinto. And in this tomb, there's not very much information. It's the day of his death and also the day of his birth, and a little bit more. But gathering these informations with others, he managed to collect. David de Sola did make a little biography, and it is here. With a little bit more, I managed to collect in this few weeks before this talk. He was a member of the community. He's in the records of the community, Sha'arit Israel, in the 40s. He was at Stratford. There is also a record in Stratford, Connecticut, speaking of him. And he did pay also for a seat in the synagogue, in the community in the 50s. And he wrote many articles published at the New York Journal in this decade, so in the 50s and 70s. And we know he was one of the signers of the Non-Importation Act, one of these acts before the independence. And very important for our talk, he was appointed as an official translator for the new government of the United States, the Spanish translator, in the 80s. He was asked to be a clerk at Sha'arit Israel, but he refused because it seems that he was already a little bit tired of working, so he refused to be a clerk. But he was giving lessons. That's also important for this talk. He was giving lessons as a Spanish teacher at his home, I guess, in the Duke Street. That's later today is I don't know, it has another name, downtown, the Duke Street, near the synagogue, I guess, near the the synagogue in Mill Street. We know that because all this year in the 80s there was in the journal he was advertised as a Spanish teacher, and he died here in New York. And in the years 1766 he published the work that is in our attention today, the prayers for Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah, and Kippur. So, and then there are very few people speaking about him or writing something about him. He is meant to be born outside the United States, in Europe, mainly, I guess, because he was identified as a Portuguese Jew. But the Mormons, they have this site, Family Search. Someone of these people, they found a wedding in Stratford in 1719, and there was a marriage between Abraham Pinto and Sarah Yeshurun, very Amsterdam names, no? In Stratford, and those are supposed to be the parents of Isaac Pinto, of many other Pintos living here between New Haven and New York. And so that's also very, and it's very likely that Isaac Pinto was born in Stratford the next year. So we have an American, so a Portuguese Jew born in the colonies before the independence, but he belonged to this very special family of Spanish Portuguese Jews, no, living there. Hopefully, and I know Oren is working on Aaron Lopez, another man close to these people, so we gotta know more about this first Portuguese living in the region, no? And coming also to New York. Then, as you remember, he translated and published his Mahzor 66, but Pinto's Mahzor was not the first English prayer book we have or we know about. There are others, Mahzorim or Sidurim in English, in vernacular English. So I gather here the most important one I am aware of. The first one is this by Gamaliel ben Padaksur in London, which has a non-Sidur name, but it's really a translation of the morning prayer there. Then we have two anonymous here in New York, but they are very likely to have been translated also by Isaac Pinto. We are not sure of that because they don't have any clues for the translation. And the first one is not really a prayer book, it is a sermon performed at the synagogue in Spanish and translated into English. And then we have this very short evening service for Rosh Hashanah, 61. And then very late in London, an anonymous Mahzor Kemincha Kehilot Kedoshot Sephardim. Sephardim, the Western Sephardim, they did not want, the Mahamad in London or here in Sha'arit Israel, they did not want to have an English translation. Why? Because there was the Spanish one with the, the ancient language of the community. No? And they did not even want a Portuguese one, which is very, very strange because all of them were really Portuguese and they were speaking also Portuguese at home. But they wanted to, I guess, to hold on to the old language of Sepharad. No? So English translation or even Dutch translation in Amsterdam, or German translation in Hamburg were not allowed by the Mahamad because they were having their vernacular Sidur and Mahzor in Spanish. So when we would like to take a look into this first English translation here in New York, we gotta go into the world of these Western Sephardim living in this diaspora, Atlantic diaspora. And if we do so, the first place we gotta take a look is Amsterdam. Amsterdam for sure is not the mother community in a real sense, but it was in the 17th century, of course, the cultural center of the Western Sephardim. No? From Hamburg, another important community, was very close to Amsterdam. Many families in Amsterdam did have also relatives in Hamburg, and later on also in London, and in other places in South France. We know places like Bayonne and Saint-Jean-de-Luz. Exactly, I forgot my French. And also in other places, Den Haag, other places. So, and the Caraibic, very important, the Caraibic, because the Caraibic was founded from people coming, after you well know, from Recife, when the Portuguese took over the Dutch colony from Recife. The Sephardim went into the Caraibic and also to New York in the middle of the 17th century. So we gotta understand better how these people, these Western Sephardim, thought and understand themselves and their heritage, the way they will try to remember Sepharad. No? And an important place or an important space for this remembering was Venice, because the community in Venice was much older. Now, Western Sephardim came to Venice very early, and they founded there a community, no? La Scuola Ponentina, Scuola Spagnola, no? And in Venice, that's also very interesting, where there was a place for the Levantine Sephardim from the Ottoman Empire, no? Called the Scuola Levantina, the Levantine school. Another one for the Western Sephardim, the Scuola Spagnola. We have here a view, this is more an 18th century view of the synagogue. So, and Venice is important because when the community started to develop in Amsterdam, they went to Venice for look after the Ashkamot of Venice. No, the rules of the community in Amsterdam are those, more or less, those from Venice, from the Western Sephardim in Venice. So, 16th century Italy was very important for the construction of this Western Sephardic identity. And what interests me is vernacular, the use of vernacular and translation. How these Western Sephardim would have a relationship not only to Hebrew as a sacred language, but also to their traditional language. And this relationship to the vernacular is very old, I guess, and more important than we have thought, I guess, until now. Because there are many clues and hints that point out that Spanish or Castilian, or perhaps also Aragonese, even Portuguese, were very important languages in the communities already in the Iberian Peninsula. And I'm fighting against the notion that as a personal battle I have against the word. I am very much against the idea that Hebrew was a kind of vernacular in the Aljamas, in the communities of Sepharad, and very much against the idea that vernacular was supposed to be for women and conversos. I guess Hebrew was a language for learned people and people who could go to the Hebrew school and learn something. But many of the Sephardim, they were merchants, they were tailors, they were shoemakers, and they didn't have time to go to learn very much Hebrew. They knew, of course, some words, but as is still today the case, the average Sephardi has to use Spanish, Castilian, and that's explained also why Ladino was so important in the diaspora after that. So, but here you have, this is a Siddur, a medieval Siddur. I call it here the Siddur Jerusalem because I have found it in a very special place in an auction house. It is so the oldest Siddur I know, and in Spanish, but which is also almost complete. Not complete, but it has more than 120 pages, which is very much. Before the Siddur, we only did have some fragments from the Geniza in Cairo. There are also some leaves of some Spanish Siddurim. No? Here is the index, so we may know the prayers in the Siddur, and here is, I don't know, it's one of the prayer of this Siddur. I got this, I was in Jerusalem, we were with Ronnie. In January, I got the permission by the owner to publish something about the Siddur because I was dealing with him, with antiquities, antiquarians. You have to deal with them a long time. Many years I've been dealing, and now I may write something about this wonderful piece. So, what I wanted to say with this is that vernacular in the Sephardic tradition was very old and very important, a part of, I guess, Sephardic identity. Then coming to the Siddur, and I guess David knows about that, perhaps, if you look into the Sephardic Siddur, there's not much research. That is, if you go to the classical work of Elbogen, about Siddurim is Ashkenaz, is Sephardic. The Sephardic prayer book is there. Is just a little thing about that. There has been very few research about the Sephardic Siddur. What we know is a very important publication is the first one, 1519, in Venice. Daniel Womberg, which was also the publisher of the Talmud and many other important works, he published this Temunot, Techinot, Tefilot Sefarad, is the first printed Siddur we know. There are some fragments of incunabula, published also in Portugal and one also, I guess, in Naples in South Italy, of the Sephardic Siddur. But here we have this first published Hebrew version of the Spanish rite, Minhag Sefarad. No? And this edition is very important because all that came after, also in the Ottoman Empire, because Daniel Womberg wanted to sell his books in the Ottoman Empire. That's the reason he was publishing in Venice. He sent the books into the Ottoman Empire. So Western and Eastern Sephardim would have this text as their own Siddur, which is very, very interesting. Then in Ferrara, in the middle of the 16th centuries, Yom Tovatias and Abraham Ushque decided to translate the Womberg Siddur into the vernacular, into Spanish. What did they did publish it in a different way. They would take the liturgy for the weekdays, Shabbat, and Pesach and the other feast as a Siddur. And they publish a Machzor only with Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. And from that time, this difference was already older, I guess. But with this publication among Sephardim, a Machzor would become only a book for Rosh Hashanah, for this cycle between Rosh Hashanah, Yamin Noraim, and Kippur. And a Siddur would have daily prayers, Shabbat, no? Rosh Chodesh, and the Hanukkah, no? Pesach, and so on. So, and sometimes the Bomberg Siddur did also have the Haftarot, all the readings from the Torah and from the prophets, no? The weekly readings at the end of the Siddur. So then Sephardim did make this difference, which was which was also the layout that came into the lowlands at the end of the centuries. With this publication here, Yaakov Israel published the Siddur from Uzque. Is the same, almost the same, with little variations. In 1584, in the city of Dordrecht, even though the book says that it's published in Mainz, in Germany. But this is clearly a kind of diverting, no, the attention to another place. And he did also publish the Machzor, no, the order of Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. And those are very important to us because this is the tradition that Isaac Pinto took over in his translation. And going now into the translation of Isaac Pinto, this is the preface of Isaac Pinto, and Isaac Pinto would say very clearly that he has learned a lot of the Machzor, or the order of prayer, published by Isaac Nieto in London, which is this one here. So he is referring in his English translation to a publication made in Spanish in the community of London. So as I was telling you, the Mahamad in London only did allow Spanish translations and not English translation at that time, no? So we have this here, which Isaac Pinto has in his hands, no? And he says, yeah, I am owning a lot to this translation. And he translates, this is very important, I guess, the exhortation. I will come back here. If you see here, the next page is an exhortation in Pinto's Machzor. Here's the text of the exhortation, which is a translation of the original exhortation by Isaac Nieto. He's taking over that and translating that. I did it so that you may see how he did it. No, some catchwords here in the text: mortal man, máquina del universo, the system of the universe, the condemnation here, the holy house here, la sagrada casa, the sacred house. No, the heart, el corazón, heart is here. He expanded that. This is typical when you translate in the early modern time. You will expand. You are trying to say that, but with more words, no? But it is the same text. So what we know here, and that's very important for me, he translated that from Spanish into English. Then, what did Isaac Pinto translate? This is the layout or the index of the prayer book by Isaac Pinto. he did a kind of, he selected text that came from what we may call the Sidur, and text from the Mahzor, the service of Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, and the feast, Moadim. And from the Mahzor, he did translate Rosh Hashanah, but not every text from Rosh Hashanah, and the service of Kippur, and also not every text from Kippur. My guess is he translated here, and he did put together Sidur and Mahzor in one piece of work, no? Both. And he translated that which was which were the most visited or attended liturgies. Shabbat, Yom Kippur, and Rosh Hashanah, basically. Which for the Sephardim in the previous century would have not been something they would have done. Because for them, the most important thing, I guess, was the daily Shacharit, the morning prayer, the daily morning prayer that should have been here and is not. I guess here, by Pintos, which is more, I guess, is a practical, so American way of thinking. He thought, I gotta be practical, there is not enough space. I would like to translate what is most needed. In the community, people don't go every day to the synagogue. Perhaps they pray that at home, but I don't know. I am going to translate Shabbat, Kippur, and Rosh Hashanah. No? And then there's also a huge difference in the why did the Italian, the Sephardim from Italy, from Ferrara, did this huge publication of the Sidur on one hand and the Mahzor in the other hand. They did this difference because those books were very bulky, very, very much. The Mahzor was very long because the prayers for Kippurs were endless. The idea of the Sephardim in the 16th century was you gotta be the whole day and the whole night praying in the synagogue. So you need a lot of prayers, very, very, very long prayers. So, and fast and not eating at all in the synagogue, bare feet, praying the whole time. That was the idea, no? So this Mahzor from the 16th century are very, very long. No? And also the Sidur is very long. The morning prayer has the Keter Malkut at the beginning, the Bakashot, and then the whole morning prayer is also very long. After the Amidah, you have a lot of prayers, no? You have to pray. So that you may spend the whole morning from very early in the morning, praying in the Beit HaKnesset. So, and I am finishing. How did Pinto, his translation, his English translation? Well, my guess, I am starting with this research, and I have a year. I got an appointment at Harvard for 1 year as a visiting scholar, and one of my plans is to profit this time to do also more in this direction. My guess is that Pinto did not translate his prayer book from Hebrew, but from Spanish. I guess there are many clues that point out he did know some Hebrew, and perhaps I may say something about that later, but I guess the translation is from Spanish, from the Spanish prayer books into English. We have here an example how this translation did work. This is the oldest Mahzor I have found. Was printed in Venice at the end of the 16th century, by this printer, Giovanni Di Giara, is a follower of Bomberg. I guess there was an older version. I haven't found a copy. I was hoping to find some copies here at the Jewish Theological Seminary, because in the catalog they have some Mahzor from Venice earlier, but those are not Mahzor, are Sidurim. It's the Justiniani Sidur. So I was a little bit disappointed, but I guess there was an early one, because we have this translation from Abraham Usque, which is from the 50s. So he may have translated from an Hebrew original, but until now I haven't found one. But if there was one edition, should have been very, very similar to this one from Di Giara, because Di Giara was printing text already edited by Bomberg, so should have been this text here, no? Then we have here, the way you may see, I have chosen two prayers. This Eloheinu Sheva Shamayim, this is from Yom Kippur, and this is the translation by Usque, 53. And speaking of Carvajal, Luis de Carvajal has this text, which is very, very, for me, very exciting to find out that. Carvajal did publish these fragments in Mexico City at the end of the 16th century also. And here, this is also from the same, it is a selichot or a piyut, very long, no, from the Yom Kippur liturgy, the Di Giara version, the Usque version, and also in the Carvajal manuscript. And now we are going to take a look into Pinto and Nieto, the same passages. Is this selichot called Vidil Vayavor? It's very long, has different pieces, no? And as you see here, to my taste, the Pinto English version is very much closer to the Usque version. In fact, Nieto has here a verse which is not in Usque and also not in Pinto. No? And then if you see the wording, I guess the Pinto wording is also closer to Nieto. For example, here, this verse here is not in Nieto, but it is in Pinto and Usque. So I guess he did not also have Nietos. And the thing is, in Nieto, Yom Kippur, the Kippur prayers were also very short. He did have something similar as the Usque Mahzor.
How does he translate Padilia or? Do you remember?
Yeah, it is.
I'm curious how he does that.
Yeah, I know that. It is like. It's a quotation, I guess, from the Torah. I don't know this.
It refers to the Gilul Midot.
It's an Aramaic.
Yeah.
So
Expression.
I'd be surprised if he actually
I think
translated
he just left it.
He might have just left it as a
Magical word.
It's true. That's a very.
It's possible that they would have said it. You have the Hazan saying it, and then everybody else can respond.
Yes.
They don't understand what's being said, but they know that they can respond to Dil V'Yavol, and everybody says it together. So I wouldn't be surprised if they left it like that.
I mean, today it's a high point in Sephardi Slichot. Like,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Isaac Pinto in his prayer book has always the beginning of every prayer in Hebrew, in transliterated Hebrew. Yeah, transliterated. Like this here.
Does he have Hebrew at all? Is it Hebrew and Spanish?
No, it's all English, which is very much Ferrara, because in Venice you would find, by Caballero, is Isaac Caballero, he has almost like a mirror Hebrew and Spanish. The Ferrara tradition is only the vernacular, with some little things in Hebrew, but there is in the Yom Tov Atia Sidur, he would like Isaac Pinto have the beginning of each prayer in transliterated Hebrew.
So you can follow along what the Chazan is doing.
Exactly.
They can know where they are and where they should be.
Yeah. And I guess he knew some Hebrew or did have some help. I don't know. I would like to look closer into that. Or he was copying a Sidur, a Maksot that did have these beginnings in Hebrew. So then the last example is this very long prayer here, which is this one who says, "Do it for the sake of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." No? And if you see here, my impression was also that the wording from Usque was very much like the wording of Pinto, that Pinto was using a Sidur close to this one, as it was the Sidur in Dordrecht, no? And yeah, in Amsterdam we may find in the 17th century, going up, I guess, to the 18th century, I have to look closer to that, a different edition of the same Sidur with some variation. I don't know, but my experience has been Sidurim are always different. In this tradition, every Sidur is different. They may change little things or which are very important, I guess, for when you would like to have a genealogy of prayer books, you should look into these changes. And of course, Menashe ben Israel was very important because he did a lot of changes because of theological reasons in the Sephardic Sidur in Amsterdam. Yeah, I guess there is this connection with this very long-standing tradition, but also the translation of Pinto is not from the Hebrew original, but from the Spanish version, which is also, I guess, a very beautiful example of how this Western Sephardic culture was so complex and so rich, no? And how attached they were to this inheritance, this heritage from Sepharad. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have time for some questions. You have a question to start with? I have a few, but yeah, Joshua.
So you showed the piece from Carvajal, the manuscript. Did he only have that? Did Carvajal only have that one section, or was the full prayer available to him?
Until now, I did only identify this section, like fragments. He has other prayers, but from the morning prayer, the Berachot HaShachar, very, very well written, and also some fragments from the Vichat HaMazon. So he has.
And in Carvajal's manuscripts, is there anything before or after, or just?
He mixed it, so it's very complex because he mixed it with Luis de Granada, which is a Christian author. He would mix that, and also he would write his own prayers. So he has a kind of, very hybrid text. Yeah, like that.
These were two very
Toda Rabah.
these are very, very fascinating presentations. I think the issue of the vernacular in reading is fascinating. I have two questions about language, and I think maybe allows both of you to answer at once. And Susana, I was wondering, so we know that, for example, Carvajal seems to have had some influence from the Spanish text, right, written in Italy in the 16th century. But do we see this in Brazil also? Does this apply, this case of Castilian being a holy language apply to communities in Brazil, or even in Portugal? And then I also was wondering, what happens to Judeo-Arabic, right? When does it disappear? When does it get replaced by Castilian and Portuguese and Aragonese? I always wondered that. When does that shift take place? And I don't know if you have an answer to that even, or but maybe you can meditate on it a little bit. Very fascinating.
Yeah, let's start with Brazil. Yeah.
It's a different context and also different chronology, I will say. I think this beginning in Brazil, although because there's a kind of anomaly in the chronology, because the first entry of the Inquisition in Brazil, really first one, is in the 1590s. But because there wasn't a tribunal in Brazil. There are some trials from the 40s and 50s, but very rare pieces. And actually the more structured repression was from the 90s. And they were reported denunciations from early on, since the beginning of the 40s, actually.
Wow.
So what they are denunciating is something more ancient in a certain way. So the difference of the chronology is they are denunciating even things that happened before the printing of Ferrara.
Okay.
So I think those new Christians don't have actually books. Maybe this is one of the reasons for they are relying more on oral traditions.
Right.
We will see the same process as I found in Mexico, with circulation of prayer books, clandestine, even from Ferrara or other prayer books, in the 17th century from Amsterdam, even before the Dutch presence in Brazil.
Wow.
So there, in the second visit of the Inquisition, you have reference to books.
Wait, so that means there are new Christians who
streams,
came
yeah.
back to Judaism in Amsterdam, who are now going to Brazil for business. Before the Dutch come there, they're already there, and they're bringing their knowledge, and they're bringing maybe a book, or they remember some prayers, and they can write it down for people. So it's via Amsterdam,
Yes, what I found
early Amsterdam.
doesn't mean that there is no traveling or circulation via Italy, but I find more reference to books that came from
Well,
Amsterdam.
makes sense considering Daniel Strum's work about,
Yes, exactly.
Brazilian Amsterdam connections.
There was a lot of Brazil and Amsterdam connection even before
Yeah, that's
presence.
Presence of-
present. So I would
That's
say
interesting,
it's
yeah.
similar
Circuits of
but
books.
different
Yeah.
because we have a kind of shift in the we have this kind of discrepancy in the chronology.
Which make totally sense because Portugal was more connected to the lowlands through the commerce in the north, and the Spanish Empire was more connected to Italy, through Milan and Naples.
That makes sense.
Both
So-
worked, but in this case, what I found in the inquisitorial documents from the beginning of the 17th century, the visit is from 1618. Second visit
Yeah.
is a strong connection with Amsterdam and also through books.
It follows the sugar circuits, right? It
Exactly.
centers the ingenio again, right? It's very interesting. Wow.
About Judeo-Spanish,
Judeo-Arabic.
and Judeo-Arabic, is a fascinating question. What we know is Ramban spoke Arabic. He wrote in Arabic because the Andalusian communities, would use Arabic as a learned language. In the medieval times, we know that also Muslims, Jews, and Christians living in the Muslim parts of Iberia would have spoken Mozarabic or Romance. We call that Romance. So we guess that also before these places became Christian, through the expansion of the Christian kingdoms, the main population, also the Arab Muslim population, would have spoken a kind of vernacular Spanish, or no, we call that Mozarabic, and we have trace. If you see into the Hebrew, yeah, and in the Muashahas, in these poems written by Hebrew poets, like, I don't know, even Gavirol or so, they would have quotations in vernacular Romance, no?
Which is very weird.
Yeah.
But my professor of medieval Spanish literature, Salvador Martinez, explained to me explained to all of us that the oldest written Spanish we have is written in Hebrew characters.
Yeah, they gotcha.
It's not Spanish, it's this older weird language, but it's in Hebrew characters. And this is from someone who
like later what we call aljamiado later, which is Ladino written with Hebrew, or solitreo, but it's called aljamiado in Spain. Then we know that when the Christian expansion came, the kingdoms from the north began to expand into the south, those communities came into Spanish rule or Castilian rule. Perhaps the best example is Toledo, because Toledo has a huge Jewish population and was also the center of the Castilian kingdom. There, we know some in the community, they still spoke Arabic, or Arabic was very important still in the community at times of Alfonso the Tenth. It's called the Wise, no? Because Hebrew scholars were translating from Arabic into Castilian, which is also that has very much been researched, but I guess we should do more research about that. This Jewish scholar would translate from Arabic into Spanish and not Castilian, and not into Latin, which was perhaps the learned. And this is the reason why in Castile, in medieval Castile, Spanish became a language also of knowledge, no? Books like this book of astrology, of history, of magic.
Well, the language of Alfonso, right?
Yeah, exactly. They would have exactly. They would translate from Arabic into, and then faded away. So little by little. But I guess still in the 15th century. Jews in the Castilian kingdoms would have this go-between function, this going through cultures into the Muslim countries and coming back and having these activities as ambassador or translators, no? But not so much as in the early times, no? And finally, if you look into the Sidurim, we have these wonderful prayer books from the Lisbon school, and also Castilian Sidurim, with very beautiful illustrations.
printed.
No, manuscript, medieval, so 14th and 16th century manuscripts. They have the illustration are very Arabic style. And the scholar thinks, there is also a kind of identification between the Jewish communities and this more Islamic or Arabic origin.
It becomes almost like a style. The Jewish style is Islamic. When a Jew is going to make a synagogue, they make it in the Islamic style way after the time that they're speaking Arabic, and it's a
like el tránsito,
and the synagogue in Cordoba, which is from the 14th century. So it's already a time that they're probably not speaking Spanish. They've been Yeah, it's
Yes.
very interesting. It's kind of an association.
Yeah.
It's an aesthetic style, even if they themselves are no longer
Yeah.
involved in Arabic.
Which is called Morisco or
A
Mudéjar.
lot of them, you know, when they arrive in Morocco, I mean, there are people here who
They were at home.
no,
They were-
they didn't speak Arabic. It was very
Ah.
hard for them. No, the
Yeah.
opposite. It's the
Ah,
opposite.
okay,
They would
yeah.
They showed up to these places. They couldn't, unless you were from Granada. I would love to. I don't know anyone who's worked on Granada. Like there were Jews in Granada in
Very
1492.
few, yeah.
They left. Where'd they go? I don't know enough about that.
What happened with them?
That would be the only place where it would maintain. Yeah. Well, there are a lot of Muslims who went to Morocco. also. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes me think of Hussein's fancy work on the Christian Iberian kings adopting Islamic court
Yeah,
style.
yeah. Style.
Right? It's style.
Islamic
right.
style,
Right.
yeah.
The style, the court style, right? To show their grandeur, right?
But also the language. Think that I guess 1/4 of Spanish today is Arabic.
Arabic, yeah. Yeah.
So-
Especially administration.
A lot of
yeah.
we have a lot of works from Arabic.
Foods, yeah, yeah.
A lot of things. Do we have time for other questions? We have time for one or two questions. Anyone? I also have more questions, but I'm curious. What are the people? Can you, Susanna? Can you talk about when they testify? When Bianca Diaz says, you know, we did these things, and you're reading it in the inquisitorial file. So what's your critical thinking there? Like, what's your kind of what raises your antenna about what's real and what's them spinning, right? Because in front of the inquisitors, you tell a story to save yourself and save the people you love. You're not there for the honesty, right? So when are you reading and you feel like, oh, I'm with them? Because that's one of the beautiful things about what you did tonight is that you brought us in, like her descriptions were so evocative of this room. All these women are sitting around and they're arguing about theology and they're doing all these religious acts and it's almost like a co-fraternity or co-sorority. And yet how much of that is them just telling the inquisitors what they want to hear, you know, like in the fake witch trials or, you know, I mean, we have so many examples.
Yeah, that's the question. No? And also that was the important contribution of Herman to this because he wrote a maybe not so read article right now about like inquisitorial trials as fiction, something like this. But I think they sometimes what is the truth or not is also maybe a question I don't know if we are putting it right. I don't know if that's the question we should be asking. But, sometimes it's easy, of course, to see that we are crossing a lot of documents, not only, different testimonies from different trials, also other material outside the Inquisition, or also other material inside the inquisitorial archive, but not trials. So I think scholars nowadays who work on Inquisition are aware of this need to cross and use other materials. I will start from this. So we try to corroborate some of the stories with other materials. For instance, if I know that they are in the Discurso de Videns, saying they were living in different places, I will try to trace that migratory trajectory in order to. The case, for instance, from Mexico, we have an abundant documentation, and yes, they really describe with very important details, those moments. And also with some differences. So you can more or less know that they are actually describing something that was going on. This is not saying that they were performing Jewish ceremonies. It's not the same. Mm-hmm. But they were together, they have a lot of ties together, and they were performing things. The other thing that was what I tried to bring it today more was the individual agency to choose what they want to testify to the inquisitors. So it's to say, when Justamente, for instance, says that she was reading, it's a very voluntary act to say, I want to present myself. Because she could say, I traveled to Mexico on the fleet of Viceroy, etc. And period. She didn't have the need, and for sure not to save her life, to say that she was reading a book on that ship. So to me, I found this kind of moments as a sort of the most autobiographic ones. So when you see in inquisitorial testimonies information that clearly it was not necessary, because they could go through the trial without saying it, but they choose to present it. And also those kind of, also another moment where I think we can see the more veracity in the testimonies are those ones who sound more like direct discourse, when you can find the orality of testimonies. It was
And
the
he
case.
said to me, and he
Yeah.
came in, and he.
Yeah, and more than this, because sometimes there you have the hand of the writer, but for instance, in that case of Ria, you can see clearly you can hear in Portuguese, you can almost hear the sentence that people were saying. So we are not little women, we are strong as rocks. So, it's, I think those moments are those who clearly gave us a kind of alarm that we are reproducing in some way some conversation that happened. That's not, I'm not stating that things are absolutely true, or that inquisitorial lens has not doesn't shift the interpretation. I'm saying that there is clearly some traces of that moment.
Constant question. Yeah.